Denver 7's Russell Haythorne, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver and Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our goal today is to present a ballot issue forum as we gear up for Election Day, which is Tuesday, November 8th. Among the decision items for voters on this year's ballot is a statewide issue, Proposition 121, which asks Colorado voters, should the state income tax rate be reduced from 4.55% to 4.40%? Our format for the forum will follow a basic debate outline with opening and closing statements, dialogue between our two speakers, and will include responses to questions submitted by the forum organizers. Let's begin by meeting the participants who will present and discuss the pros and cons of Prop 121. Beginning at my right, Ben Murray, who is the director of the Fiscal Policy Center at the Independence Institute, and Mr. Murray will be speaking in favor of the proposition. Mr. Murray, thank you for being here. And on my left is State Senator Chris Hansen, who represents District 31, that's in the eastern portion and southeastern portion of Denver, including Capitol Hill. Senator Hansen will be speaking against the proposition. Senator, thank you for being here. We welcome you both. We will begin with a 1 minute and 30-second opening statement from both of our speakers. And as you can see, as the speakers can see, there are timers right out in front that will begin counting down as the speakers begin. Mr. Murray, you're up first, speaking in favor of Proposition 121. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Russell, for having me here. And I guess now is where my time starts?
Your time starts now, yes.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight, and thank you to Denver Decides, Denver 8 TV, and the citizens of Denver who put this together. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, Senator, for being here with me. So I was talking to a good friend of mine recently, and we're both Colorado transplants. I moved here from D.C. with my wife and baby, and my friend, Victor, he's a working-class Coloradan, and he's a father, he's an immigrant. And we were talking about how lucky we are to live in this very beautiful state. But, quickly the conversation turned kind of somber when my friend said, with this dismay, really, that he's only about one emergency expense away from having to choose between gas and groceries. Now, he explained that he came here for opportunity, and just a couple years ago, he could live comfortably in this state, supplying the needs for his family, and even having extra money to save for the future. He's not low income, and he earns too much to receive government assistance. But my friend's not alone. A recent congressional study shows that the prices have risen over 15% in Colorado since the start of last year. The typical Colorado family who earned $72,000 at the start of 2021 would need to earn $80,000 today to keep up. Now, let me give you some hope here. This year, citizens have put Proposition 121 on the ballot. The measure gives Colorado taxpayers the opportunity to vote themselves a small 0.15% income tax rate reduction. It would save Colorado taxpayers money, and the great news, it wouldn't eat into Colorado's budget. It's a win-win. Colorados can keep a little more of their own money in their pocket without affecting state services.
Ben, you'll have more time in just a minute, but first, we get to Senator Chris Hansen's opening statement, and Senator, you have a minute and a half as well.
Great. Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be with everyone tonight. It's such an important debate about the future of Colorado, and the stakes are extremely high. And I want to start with a little bit of my surprise that we started with a story about a working-class family, or your friend who says he is struggling with inflation, as we all are. I have no doubt that is the case. Unfortunately, though, Proposition 121 is the absolute worst thing for working class families in the state of Colorado. It proposes to cut the income tax rate. That sounds like a good thing, right? Let's cut the taxes for everybody. But it does very little to understand how this is going to affect the state and the things that's going to take away from us. And the working class families in the state, my kids who are in Denver public schools, they are the ones who are going to suffer. They are the ones who are going to have a much bigger reduction in their services, in their benefits, in their ability to survive, and their ability to thrive in the state of Colorado because of Proposition 121. So it really feels like a huge misdirection to me tonight to start by talking about how much this is going to help a working class family. The absolute opposite is true. Millionaires will get tens of thousands of dollars of tax cuts. Super. That's great. They're the ones who put this on the ballot, not the citizens of Colorado. Working class families will suffer because the $50 they get in tax cuts is going to be far outweighed by the thousands of dollars their classrooms that their kids are attending are going to lose. This takes money directly out of education. This takes money directly out of important services in the state. I urge everyone to vote no on 121.
Senator, thank you for that. Gentlemen, we're now moving on to our rebuttal section of the debate. And Chris, Senator, you will have 1 minute in which you can offer a rebuttal to Ben's opening statement, which you just did, or you can expand on your opening statement.
Yeah, thank you. Let me go into just a little bit more detail. I mean, the working class family, the average income earner in the state of Colorado is going to see somewhere between $50 and $75 of reduction in their income taxes. $50 to $75. While millionaires in the state will see $7,000 and up in the reduction in their taxes. So who's really benefiting from Prop 121? Now, keep in mind, if we pass this, it means next year, $600 million in reduction in revenue. It means the year after that, around $420 million in reduction in revenue to the state through the income tax mechanism. And where do we take that away? Well, I can tell you because I serve as the vice chair of the Joint Budget Committee. And the last dollar in the state budget goes to K-12. It comes directly out of classrooms. That's why Proposition 121 is a huge mistake. So yes, a working class family is going to get $50 to $75, but they're going to see a huge reduction in the money in their kids' classroom. That is the wrong direction for the state of Colorado.
Chris, thank you for that. Ben, now it's your turn. You can offer a rebuttal to Chris's opening statement or expand on your own.
Well, thank you, Senator, for those remarks. Nobody is talking about cutting state services here, and it's disingenuous to suggest that's what's going to happen. The state of Colorado is experiencing multiple years, 5 consecutive years of multi-billion-dollar surpluses. That means this measure wouldn't cut into state services. It wouldn't even touch the state budget. In fact, it wouldn't touch the state budget at all, as far out as state forecasters can see or have looked. Now, let's be clear. This is also an equal tax cut for every Colorado taxpayer. I believe Colorado voters are intelligent enough to understand that because Colorado has a flat, equal tax rate for everybody, lowering the state rate with this measure means everyone gets the exact same tax cut. That's great. But this point is actually more condescending that he's made, Senator Hansen, than just assuming voters don't understand how percentages work. What Senator Hansen is saying is that it wouldn't actually help Coloradans, working class Coloradans, to get this extra money. They'd be much better off giving more money to politicians for them to spend it for these working class Coloradans for them, instead of them having the freedom to spend it for themselves.
Ben, thank you for that. Gentlemen, we're now moving on to our one-on-one rounds, and you'll both have some choices when it's your turn. Essentially, we'll start with Ben, and Ben, you can ask Chris a direct question in this round, and then Chris will have 1 minute to respond to your question, or you may take that 1 minute to expand on the points that you're making. And Ben, it's your turn.
So, since the start of the pandemic, Senator, the costs in Colorado have risen by over 19%. Over the same period, the state budget has risen about 18%, so about the level of inflation. Once the state government gets its inflation adjustment required by law to compensate for the record high inflation we've seen over the last year, state revenue, that is the amount of money the state gets to keep after issuing TABOR refunds, state revenue will be up 30% after that inflation adjustment according to state economists. Meanwhile, Coloradans' wages have only risen 11% since the start of the pandemic. Now, here's my question. Do you think it's fair to impose a small tax cut for everyday Coloradans when the state gets an automatic inflation adjustment and its budget and income are way outpacing those of regular Coloradans?
Well, Ben, I'm a little surprised because what you've just revealed is your lack of understanding of how TABOR works. Because yes, there's an inflation adjustment, but it's a 12-month lag factor. So yeah, we're facing inflationary effects across the state, and we're facing them in the state budget. 10% on average in many of the categories. The problem is Tabor is only letting us keep 3% more next year because it's a year behind. That 7% gap is $1.5 billion. And guess what that's going to come out of? It's going to come out of inflation adjustments to salaries for state workers, for teachers, for school districts. That's a huge problem. And that's why this is such an ill-timed tax cut that you're proposing. So inflation adjustments are very important. The problem is Tabor and this type of proposal is only going to make things worse. And, I think what's disingenuous is saying that this is going to help working class families. I don't think $50 is going to change the trajectory for that working class family more than the problem they're going to see in their schools when the money comes out of their classrooms. That's a much bigger problem for working families. The millionaires who send their kids to private schools are not going to feel that.
Chris, thanks for your response to that. Now it's your turn. You can ask Ben a direct question, and he'll have 1 minute to respond, or you can expand.
So, Ben, I really wanted to ask you about the types of service cuts, the type of cuts you think we should make in the budget if 121 passes. In the future, we are very likely not to have Tabor refunds. In fact, OSPB has already forecasted, that's the governor's budget office, has already forecasted that our refunds are going to come down significantly and probably disappear within a couple of years. And then this 121 taking effect will have a very direct impact on the budget. So my question for you is, which services do you think we should cut? What $400 million worth of cuts do you propose?
Ben, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to point out that this measure, fortunately, won't actually cut the state budget at all. Nobody's talking about cutting state services. It wouldn't be necessary under this measure. What it would do is give Coloradans more control over their own money every time they get a paycheck. Now, you referenced the governor's economists. Your economists at JBC and in the legislature have said that we're going to continue to receive multi-billion-dollar surpluses as far as they can project. That means that when we cut the income tax rate, it won't touch the state budget at all. It will not be necessary to cut any state services. Now, I'll ask you in my follow-up question, perhaps what we could do if sometime in some hypothetical future that is necessary. And I believe I could probably just go on right now and ask that question.
Well, Ben, actually the format for this, it's actually Chris's turn to ask another question of you here in round two. So Chris, you can begin in this round with another question of Ben, and he'll have a minute to respond, or you can take a minute to offer a rebuttal to his statement just now.
Great. Well, I think I can probably accomplish both of those tasks, because I think you mentioned the legislative forecast. You're absolutely right. For the next 2 years, they forecast surpluses that would have to be returned. That's great. The economy remains strong. I hope it remains strong. I hope we do not slip into recession. But I think this may be the fundamental disagreement, that this idea that it's not going to impact the state budget, because I think it's not hypothetical. 8 out of 10 years since Tabor has been in force, we have not had any refunds. So I guess I really want to understand, if history holds and we have 2 out of 10 years where there are refunds, the other 80% of the time we are going to see an impact on the state budget. What should we cut? Should we go into the senior homestead exemption? Should we reduce K-12? Should we increase tuition at higher education institutions? What do you propose? Because history tells us this is going to have a giant impact on the state budget.
Ben, your response.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. Number one, you mentioned two years of surpluses out of 10 or something like that. We're experiencing 5 years of consecutive surpluses. In fact, 6 out of the last 7 years, I believe, of projections show surpluses. As far as we know, these surpluses will continue until forecasts change, I suppose. Could hypothetically happen. We're not talking about cutting services. What we are talking about is putting more money in Coloradans' pockets right now. I mean, when you get a paycheck, that money, a little bit more of it will stay in your pocket for you to have the freedom to spend for your family the way you see fit, rather than sending up to state legislators and to politicians and bureaucrats to spend for you. I think it's somewhat condescending for our legislators to say that you're actually better off if that money trickles down through the hands of bureaucrats and politicians and comes back to you when they choose how to spend it for you. And somehow that's going to make you better off than if you just got to spend more of your money yourself.
Ben, thank you for that. And now it is your turn. You can ask the senator another direct question, and he will have 1 minute to respond, or you can take the minute to expand on any of the points you'd like to make this evening.
Thank you, Russell. So you've said, I'll continue this line of thinking here. You've said there could be a time in the future when the state isn't getting these multi-billion-dollar surpluses anymore, and that at that time this tax could eat into the state budget. Now, the legislature has the power to put tax increases on the ballot anytime they want to. In fact, voters approved one in 2020. They've approved others in the past. If voters give themselves a tax break this year, and then in future years, the state no longer has these massive surpluses, as you're saying, would you support putting an income tax rate increase on the ballot? And do you trust the democratic process and the people of Colorado to make the right decision at that time, even if that means rejecting the tax increase?
Ben, thank you. Senator, your
Yeah,
response.
thanks. And just to remove all doubt, anticipating that you would advocate for surpluses forever and therefore no big deal on 121, I have the time series with me right here. In the 2010 to 2020, we had 2 years with refunds, and they were both very small refunds. So history is really clear here on what is ahead. Now, the economy goes up, the economy goes down, that changes state revenue as you would expect. I would certainly love for there to be surpluses for as far as the eye can see, but that's simply not the case, and history indicates otherwise. So I think we need to be clear-eyed and we need to be truthful with the voters of Colorado about the impact here. So it's not condescending to say, I want to fund the schools. Is that somehow looking down on voters? Absolutely not. My kids, your kids, everybody's kids in this city and this state want great classrooms. And what you're proposing is going to take $400 million during most years out of K-12. That is what I object to. That's not condescending. That is delivering what our state expects, great education for our kids.
Thank you, Chris. Ben, your turn once again. You can either offer a rebuttal to that statement just now, or you can ask Chris another question.
Thank you, Russell, and thank you for the response, Chris. I would appreciate a response to the question: would you support a tax increase in the future if this ended up happening, and would you trust the democratic process even if voters rejected that tax increase? To your point about not having revenue surpluses, the reason for that is because the state asked voters back in 2005 with referendum C, can we keep an extra amount of money so that we can spend more on state services? And since then, the state has gotten more than $30 billion extra because voters said, yeah, sure, we'll give you extra. That's why we didn't reach those surpluses in the past. But let me ask you my question. Now, during the pandemic, the legislature increased fees on Coloradans by billions of dollars at a time when the state revenue was already reaching historic highs. Even though Coloradans passed a measure requiring the state to seek voter approval before passing large fee increases, the legislature used legal gimmicks to get around the will of the people. The biggest of these was Senate Bill 21260, which imposed over $5 billion in costs on Coloradans through fees on things like gas, ride-sharing, and delivery services. You supported that bill. But you also supported legislation this year to reverse some of those fees and some other fees. What made you decide earlier this year that Coloradans needed that break from government fees and that it was okay to give up those state revenues?
Senator?
Yeah, thank you. Let's have a debate on transportation. I think the voters of Colorado have been very clear that they want solutions to our transportation problems. So what I think you just advocated for was not fixing the roads, which I am surprised by. But let's go with that. Let's not fix the roads. Where are we as a state? Where are we as an economic powerhouse? We're nowhere, and we know that. And that's why we carefully crafted a package that would address the problem. And why did we have some of those pause this year? Well, because we're in a situation of high inflation, and it was appropriate to provide some temporary relief. But I think it's completely makes sense to have folks be able to have good roads, and to do that, we needed to pay for it. And that's exactly what the legislature did. And I'm very proud of Senate Bill 260 because we have delivered at the legislature exactly what the voters were asking for. That's the democratic process. That is the republic we live in. What you're advocating for is a very different vision of Colorado where we can't drive, we can't get around. That's not a place I want to live.
Gentlemen, we're wrapping up this segment in the interest of time, but Chris, to be fair, we'll let you ask one final question of Ben if you have one.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the tenets that my fellow interlocutor tonight is often part of at the Independence Institute is this idea that somehow tax cuts pay for themselves. And so one of the things I had a chance to look at over the last few years is what happened in Kansas, where they made some huge income tax cuts and basically defunded their schools in the process. And I guess I wanted to ask, is that the direction you'd like to see Colorado go, to follow the situation that we saw in Kansas over the last few years? They've now corrected it, thank goodness. But what do we do about K-12 funding long term if we continue every single cycle to see these initiatives come out of the Independence Institute?
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll reemphasize that this wouldn't require any cuts to education or to any state programs. But I want to go back to what you said earlier, that education gets the last dollar. And you pointed out that you know all this because you're vice chair of the JBC and you're also chair of appropriations. Why is the legislature giving only the last dollars to education? It seems to me that the legislature should be giving the first dollars to education, and we should be prioritizing this. The fact of the matter is that if at some hypothetical point in the future, this measure does force the government to start thinking about where to cut or something like that, number one is the legislature can always just ask us if they can increase taxes. But number two, it'll be up to the JBC, it'll be up to the legislature to decide how to prioritize. What the people of Colorado get to do as the ultimate arbiters of what power they want to give to government and which power they want to retain for themselves is they get to say, state, this is how much money we are choosing to allow you to have, and you do the best with it that you're able to within what we've chosen to give you. I'm sure legislators and politicians like Senator Hansen would love to have infinite amount of your money to spend for you, and I'm sure you'd be much better off if he were spending it all for you instead of you spending it for yourself and your family.
Ben, thank you for that. Senator, thank you for that. We're moving on to card questions. This next round features questions submitted by the forum organizers, and you will each have 1 minute to respond. And please, out of respect for the other, keep your answers to just 1 minute. And we'll begin with Mr. Ben Murray, who again is here speaking in support of Proposition 121, which asks you, the voters of Colorado, should the state income tax rate be reduced from 4.55% to 4.40%. And Ben, this first question again is for the forum organizers, and I know we've addressed this topic here tonight, but again, here comes the question. In general, in a Tabor refund year, what would Prop 121's effect be on state spending and on Tabor refunds? Ben, you have 1 minute.
Thank you for that question, and it's a great question, actually. I'm glad it came up. We are in a situation where the state is getting multi-billion-dollar surpluses year after year after year. What that means, number one, for spending, is that reducing income tax rates by a little bit would reduce revenue, but it would reduce the revenue that the state isn't legally allowed to keep anyways, which means it actually wouldn't dig into the state budget at all. Now, what does that mean for refunds? Well, it means that refunds would go down by the exact amount that this reduces revenues. Now, that's okay because voters are still getting that money. They're getting just as much as they would have otherwise gotten through refunds, but instead of getting all of it through refunds and having to wait a year or more after their paycheck to get that money back, that's painful with 9% inflation. It means the value of that money's gone down a lot. But instead, with this measure, you would get a little bit more of your money with every paycheck. It would stay in your pocket, and you get to spend it now to help you and your family and your businesses while it's still worth more than after it erodes through inflation.
Ben, thank you very much for that response. Senator, now it's your turn to answer a question from the forum organizers, and I know you've addressed this already in the debate as well, but here comes the question. More than half of Colorado taxpayers, it's been said, more than half of Colorado taxpayers would save less than $40 a year if this were to pass. How much would those at the top, those making over $1 million a year, who you've pointed out already, save on average?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it really gets to the heart of the decision that we're asking Colorado voters to make. You know, the millionaires, million and above in income per year. So not the millionaires total throughout their life, but $1 million earners are going to get at least $7,000. If you make exactly $1 million, you're going to get about $7,000. And you can do the math, right? You make $2 million, you're going to get 14, et cetera. Is this what we're trying to do? Is this the type of state we want to live in where, we're being sold something that's an equal tax cut, where it's 75 cents on your paycheck? That's what we're talking about here? While millionaires are going to get tens of thousands of dollars of tax relief? Folks, that is just backward. The same families that are struggling, that are going to get 75 or 80 cents per paycheck, they're going to see way more than that come out of the services they rely on, like their local schools, like the higher ed institutions. This is not the direction we want to go.
Senator, thank you for that response. The next question is for you as well. This measure would cut, you have argued, this measure would cut the state general fund, some say by more than $400 million in the next full state budget year and each year thereafter, whether or not there is enough revenue for a Tabor refund. What are the main programs the general fund supports?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I think, again, getting to the heart of the bait and switch that is the premise of Proposition 121, that somehow this is some sort of equal tax thing that's not going to hurt anybody. It's the proverbial free lunch. Folks, it's not a free lunch. We need to pay for schools. We need to pay for roads. We need to pay for the Department of Corrections. We need to pay for universities. We need to pay for the Judicial Department, right? All the big functions of state government that we rely on, that we count on for this state to be great, for this state to thrive. And so these sorts of proposals are essentially just trying to cut out the revenue streams that are needed for those services to be successful. It is an anti-tax, anti-government sort of proposal. And look, it's not condescending for me to want great schools. It's not condescending for me as a public official, as an elected representative in Denver, to want great universities and public safety. These are the things that make our state work, that make our state thrive. Let's say no to 121.
Senator, thank you for that. Ben, it's now your turn again. You've argued that this proposition would not impact the state budget detrimentally. What income tax rate would the measure sponsors ultimately like in the long run?
Sure. Thank you for that question from our viewers. And I think it's a great question. It's not really what we're here to talk about today, but yeah, we do believe, we agree actually with Governor Polis, and we agree with the Republican nominee for Governor Heidi Ganahl, who both said that it would actually be ideal to reduce the income tax in Colorado to zero ultimately. Now, we'd have to find a way to accomplish that. But in terms of, if you're talking about, again, not the topic of this discussion really, but if you're talking about what is really the most effective way to generate revenue for the state, when you tax income, you're punishing, how do you earn income, right? You earn income by working and being productive. When you tax something, you discourage that activity, right? Is earning income, is being productive and working the thing that we want to discourage? Governor Polis has said, no, there are probably better ways to do it. We do agree with that. But the focus of this ballot measure is just a very small tax cut that wouldn't hurt the state budget. It would just put a little bit more money back in people's pockets today.
Ben, thank you. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you. We appreciate the robust and healthy discussion here. That brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and now we move on in this debate to our closing statements. Each of you will have a minute and a half, 90 seconds for a closing statement, and we will reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we begin with Senator Chris Hansen. And Chris, again, you have 90 seconds to offer your closing statement.
Great, thank you. Well, again, it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion tonight. Such a vital discussion on the fiscal future of the state of Colorado. You know, Colorado has had such great success over the last decades because we have the right balance of forces. We've got relatively low taxes across the board, very low property tax rates, middle of the table when it comes to income tax, and it's that balance that has really helped us to thrive. The proposal in 121 is to start to upset that balance. It's to take resources out of the things that we count on. You know, as I mentioned earlier tonight, I'm proud father of 2 kids in Denver Public Schools. I want to see those schools be maintained at a very high quality level. And we're behind, folks. We are behind in funding education. We have a negative factor in the budget, in fact. That's what it's called. The budget stabilization factor, the negative factor. We're already behind. And Prop 121 is just going to put us further behind. It's a step in the wrong direction. And as we've talked about tonight, it is a tax cut that largely only benefits the ultra wealthy in the state of Colorado. That would be a silly decision to transfer more tax benefit to the wealthiest Coloradans at the expense of working class families who send their kids to the local public schools. It would be a terrible decision to move forward with 121, and I urge everyone watching tonight to please vote no on Proposition 121.
Senator, thank you for your closing statement. And now a closing statement from Mr. Ben Murray. And Ben, again, you have 90 seconds to offer your closing.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here and discuss this really important ballot measure, this measure that'll give Coloradans an opportunity to get a little bit of a break at a time that they really need it. It's a break for all Coloradans. It's an equal, fair tax cut for all Coloradans. And, my friend Victor, he was living a comfortable life just 2 years ago, even with the pandemic. And now, after record inflation, Colorado's 15.6% inflation since the start of last year, that congressional study showed it's the highest in the entire country. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why we're worse off in terms of inflation than other states, and it's because the taxes and fees that have been imposed on Coloradans and have been increased without voter permission. Over the last 2 years, politicians in this state increased fees on Coloradans by billions of dollars. They didn't ask voters' permissions before they did it either. Instead, they used legal loopholes to get around that requirement. Now, while the state was receiving the highest tax revenues in history, and receiving billions of dollars in federal aid, our elected officials imposed billions of dollars in new fees and taxes on us. Now those same politicians stand before you and they tell you that you don't deserve a small tax break because $60 just doesn't mean that much to you. Well, that's just not right in my opinion. And I think what Senator Hansen's really saying is that working and middle-class Coloradans don't know how to spend their money better than bureaucrats and politicians do. I disagree. I think this would help Coloradans. I think they need a little bit of a lifeline. And I urge you to support Proposition 121.
Ben, thank you so much for that closing. Gentlemen, way to go. That was a healthy discussion. It was great. I learned a lot. I hope the viewers did as well. On behalf of forum organizers, I'd like to thank you both for being here and discussing this. And our thanks also to Denver Decides and our partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. We hope we've given you a fair look at the pros and cons of Proposition 121. Remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Let your voice be heard. Be sure you're registered to vote and get out there and vote. For complete election information, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Russell Haythorne from Denver 7. Thank you for joining us.